This is Dr. Bol Jock with Jikmir Developmental Model. On the last videos, I explained the theoretical foundations for Jingi Developmental Model. I'll cover Plato ideas of perfect city, where he discussed the social classes that make up the city, which includes the guardians, which are the leaders of the city, the auxiliaries, which are the militaries and the police to protect the city, and then the workers, which is the general public. I also cover Adam Smith's idea of division of labor and its specialization of skills. We cover Frederick Taylor's scientific management theory, where he proposed that managers should be the one dividing the task for workers to execute. And finally, we discussed Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which highlighted what basic human needs must be covered for a human to flourish or to experience a good life. On this video, we will review South Sudan problem from a historical and organizational structure perspective. So when we look at South Sudan problem from a historical perspective, we could start all the way to Anglo-Egyptian era, which is in the late 1800s to the 1950s. So the Anglo-Egyptian regimes established Khartoum as the headquarters. So that's where they established their headquarters so they could be able to execute their operations throughout Sudan. And then when when Sudan became an independent country in 1956, Khartoum carried on that legacy and established Khartoum as the headquarters for Sudan. And they also established Juba as the central area where they can execute their operation on the southern part of Sudan, which was known as Autonomous South. So during Khartoum regime, there was no distribution of resources, and the development was placed on the northern part. So there is no development in the south. And that was the major theme why many South Sudanese rebelled, because there was disparities of resources. There was no share of resources from the north. But there was a central area where they controlled the resources and they could be able to control the north and the south. And then in 2005, when the peace happened, could say Juba or SPLM established Juba as the central part of South Sudan. The same thing, the SPLM consolidated and centralized all the resources in the capital, Juba. Again, no distribution of resources and development to the rest of South Sudan villages and Payam, especially Payam and Bumas. So what is the current state now for South Sudan then? So it is similar to previous regime, from the Anglo-Egyptian to the Khartoum regime, and now Juba. So there is no distribution of resources. Just like it happens in Anglo-Egyptian, there was no distribution of resources to Sudan and South Sudan. So they just have that central area to where they can be able to control the population. But no development was pushed to the lower level. The same thing with Khartoum. When Khartoum was controlling the Sudan, they centralized the resources, and they were not pushing it down to the grassroots level. And right now, what is the problem right now in South Sudan? What is it that we can identify as the problem? So if we look at the problem of South Sudan, I want to use this analogy. So imagine you have a grassland, and in that grassland, you want to set it on fire, and you want to see what is the most efficient way for the fire to cover that grassland. First, you could have one central location to where you set the fire on it, and then that it can spread from that to other areas. That's one way. Or you could have multiple areas where you set fire on multiple locations, and then they can spread from there and cover more area. So between those two, which one would be more efficient? It would obviously be having multiple areas, set fire on multiple areas, so they could be able to cover more areas for fires. Similarly, the Jikmir Developmental Models want to set small fires to ensure the whole field is burned quickly, metaphorically speaking. So if we establish the developmental initiative at the grassroots level, that is similar to setting fires in multiple areas. In contrast, however, as we see on the last, from this historical perspective, we realize that each empire or regime focus on just establishing a centralized government where they could be able to control the mass. However, with Jikmir Developmental Model, the Jikmir Developmental Model is proposing that rather than making that historical mistake, we can go to the grassroots and establish small fires there. And that is grassroots is Payam and Buma's level. If we are able to do that at that level, then we could be able to make sure the development is reaching the very small element of the society. And we won't be making the same mistake where a central government is controlling everything and it's not reaching the grassroots. So now that we know the problem of South Sudan from the historical perspective, how is Jikmir Developmental Model is proposing to solve that problem? The Jikmir Developmental Model proposed that it should be a bottom-up approach to the development and even administration, rather than historical approaches where the past regime focused on having a centralized government and controlling the mass from there. The Jikmir Developmental Model, in contrast, wants to start the development at the lower echelon and working its way up. And that means establishing local administration area at the Payam and Buma level, which is the lowest echelon for the South Sudan current structure. And also, it can involve other people that has expertise in those areas, especially those in diasporas. They could be able to coach, mentor the locals to make that transition from the village life to a city life. And another way the Jikmir Developmental Model wants to solve South Sudan problem is establishing community-based security at the grassroots level. And the locals should be the one that are responsible for that security initiative, because they want that ownership of their own security. Not to say that the government cannot help, but the people that should drive that change should be the locals. So, and that would be the Payam, local security, Buma security personnel. And then another way the Jingi Developmental Model wants to solve this problem is to establish the economy or jumpstart the local economies using oil revenues and other resources, such as from the developmental partners or from the loans from other countries. But those should be established, or those should be used to jumpstart the economy rather than using it as a sustaining resources for it. And also attract and establish local businesses as Payam level. Right? Payam level, because that is where majority of the people live. So you want that area to be secure and be able to have business there that can support the business or support the government, and also using NGOs efficiently. The NGOs could be able to play part in this developmental initiative by identifying where the locals need help the most and partnering with the locals to make sure that problem is being tackled. What we don't want is that for the NGOs to be treated like the one that should solve all the problem. No, they should be partnering with the locals to solve locals' problem rather than just relying on them to solve those things. So the Jikmir Developmental Model wants to have that partnership with the locals, or have NGOs and local partnership so they can work together to optimize their outputs. Right. So that's it for Jikmir Developmental Model. Again, the Jingi Developmental Model is different from other structure because it wants to focus on the bottom-up approach rather than top-down approach.